Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she stepped out of her beat-up pickup truck at the Riverside County shooting range. The California sun was already blazing at 8 in the morning, promising another scorching day in the desert. She reached into the truck bed and carefully lifted out a weathered rifle case, its leather corners worn smooth from decades of handling. The shooting range buzzed with activity as weekend warriors and serious competitors prepared for the annual Precision Shooting Championship. Sarah had been coming to this range for 3 years now, ever since she moved to the area for her job at the local engineering firm. What started as a way to honor her grandfather's memory had evolved into something much more significant. The rifle case contained her grandfather's pride and joy, a 1943 Springfield M1903A for that had seen action in World War II. To most people, it looked like a museum piece, something that belonged in a display case rather than on a firing line. The wooden stock bore the scars and scratches of countless training sessions and real combat. The metal showed signs of age, with a patina that spoke of years of careful maintenance mixed with hard use. Sarah had inherited the rifle when her grandfather passed away 2 years ago. Along with it came boxes of his shooting journals, meticulously kept records of every shot, every adjustment, every lesson learned. She had spent countless hours reading through those journals, learning about wind compensation, bullet trajectory, and the mental discipline required for precision shooting. As she walked toward the registration table, she noticed the usual crowd of competitors setting up their equipment. Most carried modern rifles worth thousands of dollars, equipped with the latest optics and adjustable stocks. Their cases were sleek and professional, matching their expensive shooting jackets and precision-engineered accessories. Marcus Thompson was already holding court near the main firing line, surrounded by his usual group of admirers. At 35, Marcus was the undisputed king of the local shooting scene. His custom-built rifle had cost more than Sarah's annual car payments, and he never let anyone forget it. The gun featured a carbon fiber barrel, a chassis system that allowed for minute adjustments, and a scope that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced loudly enough for half the range to hear, "prepare to witness perfection in action. This beauty here," he gestured to his rifle, "represents the pinnacle of modern shooting technology. Every component has been selected and tuned for maximum accuracy." Sarah tried to ignore the commotion as she signed in for the competition. The registration officer, an elderly man named Frank who had been running competitions at this range for over 20 years, smiled when he saw her name on the list. "Sarah Martinez," he said warmly. "Good to see you back. How's that old Springfield treating you?" "Like an old friend," Sarah replied, returning his smile. "Grumpy sometimes, but reliable when it counts." Frank chuckled. "Your grandfather would be proud. I remember when he used to compete here back in the 80s and 90s. That man could make that rifle sing." As Sarah walked toward the practice area to set up, she overheard Marcus talking to one of the newer competitors, a young man who seemed impressed by all the high-tech equipment on display. "The thing about modern shooting," Marcus was saying, "is that equipment matters more than ever. These old military rifles might have been fine for their time, but they're completely outclassed by today's technology. Anyone still using one of those antiques is basically handicapping themselves." The young competitor nodded eagerly. "What about that woman over there with the old rifle? Doesn't she know she's at a disadvantage?" Marcus glanced over at Sarah, who was carefully removing her grandfather's rifle from its case. He laughed, not bothering to lower his voice. "Oh, that's Sarah. Sweet girl, but she's got this romantic notion about using her grandfather's old war relic. I keep telling her she'd improve dramatically if she invested in proper equipment, but she's stubborn." Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but she forced herself to focus on her setup routine. She had heard similar comments before, though rarely quite so loudly or dismissively. She carefully inspected her rifle, checking the action and ensuring everything was properly aligned. The familiar weight and feel of the weapon in her hands brought back memories of learning to shoot with her grandfather on his small ranch in Arizona. "Shooting isn't about having the fanciest equipment," her grandfather had told her during one of their sessions. "It's about understanding your tool, respecting it, and becoming one with it. A rifle is like a musical instrument. The magic isn't in the wood and metal, it's in the relationship between the musician and the instrument." As Sarah continued her preparation, more competitors began to notice the contrast between her simple setup and the high-tech equipment surrounding her. Her shooting mat was a basic foam pad. Her spotting scope was a modest model that her grandfather had used for decades, and her rifle looked positively ancient compared to the modern marvels around her. "Is that thing even legal for competition?" someone whispered nearby. "I think it belongs in a museum," another voice added with a snicker. Sarah opened her shooting box, revealing the hand-loaded ammunition she had prepared specifically for this competition. Each cartridge had been carefully crafted, with powder charges weighed to the 10th of a grain and bullets seated to precise specifications. This was another skill her grandfather had taught her, the art of hand-loading ammunition for maximum accuracy. The practice session began, and Sarah moved to her assigned firing point. She methodically set up her shooting position, adjusting her mat and arranging her equipment with the precision of someone who had done this thousands of times. As she settled into position behind her rifle, the familiar ritual helped calm her nerves and focus her mind. The first practice shots rang out across the range as competitors began zeroing their rifles. Sarah waited patiently for her turn, watching the wind flags and noting how the morning thermals were affecting bullet flight. Her grandfather had taught her to read the environment like a book, understanding how temperature, humidity, and air pressure could affect a bullet's path to the target. When her relay was called, Sarah moved to the firing line with quiet confidence. She loaded a single cartridge and settled into her shooting position. The rifle felt perfect in her hands, the familiar stock fitting her shoulder like it had been custom-made for her. She peered through the scope, not a modern marvel of optical engineering, but a reliable inertial scope that her grandfather had used for competition shooting in the 1970s. Her first shot rang out, and she watched through her spotting scope as the bullet struck the target. A good hit, just slightly high and to the right. She made a mental note of the adjustment needed and fired her second shot. This one was closer to the center. By her fifth shot, she was consistently hitting the 10 ring. Marcus, shooting 2 positions down from her, was having his own practice session. His expensive rifle was performing as expected, placing shots with mechanical precision. However, he couldn't help but notice that the woman with the old rifle was also shooting quite well. "Not bad for a relic," he called out during a ceasefire. "But wait until we get to the longer ranges. That's where modern equipment really shows its superiority." Sarah nodded politely but didn't respond. She was focused on her grandfather's voice in her memory, reminding her about the importance of mental discipline and emotional control. "Never let anyone else get inside your head," he had said. "Shooting is a conversation between you, your rifle, and the target. Everyone else is just noise." The practice session continued for another hour, giving competitors time to zero their rifles and get accustomed to the range conditions. Sarah methodically worked through her routine, making small adjustments and noting how her rifle was performing in the morning heat. She noticed that as the temperature rose, her point of impact shifted slightly, exactly as her grandfather's shooting journals had predicted. During a break, Sarah overheard a conversation between Marcus and several other competitors near the equipment table. "I have to admit, she's shooting better than I expected," one of them was saying. Marcus shrugged. "Anyone can look good in practice. The real test comes under pressure, with time limits and competition stress. That's when equipment quality really matters. Modern rifles are more forgiving of shooter error, more consistent shot to shot. When the pressure's on, technique can only take you so far." Plus, another competitor added, "This competition has some challenging stages. There's the rapid-fire portion, the position shooting, and the long-range precision stage. I don't see how an old military rifle can compete with modern match rifles in all those disciplines." Sarah checked her watch and began preparing for the official competition to begin. She cleaned her rifle barrel carefully, ensuring no copper fouling remained from the practice session. She organized her ammunition, separating it by intended use, different loads for different stages of the competition. As she worked, she thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. After her grandfather's death, she had initially considered selling his shooting equipment. She had no experience with firearms and little interest in learning. But something about the care and love evident in his shooting journals had changed her mind. She started with basic marksmanship classes, learning the fundamentals of safety, sight alignment, and trigger control. Her first attempts were frustrating. The rifle seemed heavy and unwieldy, the recoil harsh and intimidating. But, gradually, with patient practice and study of her grandfather's notes, she began to understand the subtleties of precision shooting. The breakthrough came during her first local match 6 months after she started shooting. She had finished dead last, but the experience of competing had ignited something in her. She began spending weekends at the range, systematically working through the techniques described in her grandfather's journals. She learned to hand-load ammunition, to read wind conditions, to manage competition stress. Now, 2 years later, she had become a respected member of the local shooting community, though some still viewed her choice of equipment with skepticism. She had won several smaller matches and consistently placed in the top 5 at larger competitions. But today felt different. Today felt like the day she might finally prove that skill and dedication could triumph over expensive equipment. The loudspeaker crackled to life, announcing the start of the main competition. All competitors to your assigned firing points. The first stage will be precision shooting at 200 yards, prone position, 10 shots in 15 minutes. Equipment check will begin momentarily. Sarah gathered her gear and moved to her assigned position. The morning sun had climbed higher, and heat waves were beginning to shimmer off the concrete firing line. She set up her equipment methodically, each piece placed exactly where muscle memory dictated it should go. The range officer approached for the mandatory equipment inspection. He examined her rifle carefully, checking that it met the competition requirements for the vintage military division. Springfield M1903A4, he noted on his clipboard. Nice example. Don't see many of these in competition anymore. It belonged to my grandfather, Sarah explained. He competed with it for over 30 years. The officer nodded approvingly. These old rifles can be incredibly accurate in the right hands. Good luck today. As the inspection continued down the line, Sarah settled into her shooting position for some final dry-fire practice. She worked the bolts smoothly, feeling the precise mechanical action that had been perfected decades ago. The trigger broke cleanly at exactly 4 pounds. Her grandfather had had it professionally tuned, and she had maintained it to the same exacting standards. Marcus was making final adjustments to his rifle's position when he glanced over at Sarah's setup. Despite his earlier dismissive comments, he had to admit there was something impressive about her methodical approach. She seemed completely comfortable with her equipment, moving with the kind of confidence that came from thousands of repetitions. 5 minutes until the first relay begins firing. The announcement echoed across the range. Relay 1, prepare to move to the line. Sarah was in Relay 2, giving her a chance to observe the first group of competitors. She watched through her spotting scope as the first shots were fired, noting how the wind conditions were affecting bullet flight. The morning breeze was light, but variable, switching between 5 and 8 miles per hour from roughly 2 o'clock. The first relay completed their string, and scores were posted on the electronic scoreboard. Marcus had shot a respectable 96 out of 100, placing him third in the early rankings. Several other competitors had scored in the low 90s, with one managing a 98. Relay 2 moved to the firing line, came the announcement. Sarah picked up her rifle and ammunition, walking to the line with steady confidence. She had been preparing for this moment for months, and she felt ready. As she settled into position, she blocked out everything except the conversation between herself, her rifle, and the target 200 yards downrange. The grandfather's voice whispered in her memory one last time. Remember, sweetheart, shooting is about patience, precision, and respect for your equipment. Trust your training, trust your preparation, and trust that old rifle. It's never let our family down yet. Sarah chambered her first round, settled her cheek against the familiar wooden stock, and prepared to begin the competition that would change everything. The command to commence firing rang out across the desert range, and Sarah Martinez took a deep breath as she settled behind her grandfather's Springfield. The familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder felt like coming home. She had dreamed about this moment, her first major precision shooting championship, and now the time for preparation was over. Through her scope, the target at 200 yards appeared crisp and clear despite the shimmering heat waves beginning to dance across the firing line. Sarah's finger found the trigger, applying the smooth, straight-back pressure her grandfather had drilled into her during those long afternoons at his Arizona ranch. The rifle spoke with authority, sending the first round downrange with a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding hills. "Good hit, Center Ring," she whispered to herself, watching the bullet hole appear in the black through her spotting scope. The familiar ritual of working the bolt brought the next cartridge into the chamber with mechanical precision. Each round had been hand-loaded to exacting specifications, powder charges weighed to the tenth of a grain, bullets seated to optimal depth for her particular rifle. 2 positions over, Marcus Thompson was working through his own string of fire with his expensive custom rifle. His equipment functioned flawlessly, each shot placed with the mechanical precision that modern technology could provide. He caught glimpses of Sarah's target through his peripheral vision and had to admit she was shooting well for someone using such antiquated equipment. The morning heat continued to build as the competition progressed through its first stage. Sarah methodically fired her 10 rounds, each shot a deliberate process of reading wind conditions, adjusting for the slight mirage, and executing perfect trigger control. Her grandfather's shooting journals had prepared her for these exact conditions. The way morning thermals affected bullet flight, how to compensate for the rifle's tendency to shoot slightly high as the barrel heated up. When the ceasefire was called and targets were retrieved for scoring, Sarah felt confident about her performance. She had been in the zone that competitive shooters called the bubble, a state of complete focus where external distractions faded away and only the shooter, rifle, and target existed. The electronic scoreboard updated with second relay scores, and a murmur went through the crowd of spectators. Sarah Martinez had shot a perfect 110 shots in the 10 ring, with several shots clustered in the X ring for extra points. Her name appeared at the top of the leaderboard, ahead of competitors using rifles worth 10 times what her grandfather's Springfield had cost new in 1943. Marcus stared at the scoreboard in disbelief. His expensive equipment had delivered a solid 96, but somehow the woman with the old military rifle had outshot him by 4 points. He walked over to examine her target, which was posted on the board for verification. "Impressive shooting," he admitted grudgingly. "You really know that old rifle?" Sarah nodded politely. "My grandfather always said that the rifle is only as good as the person behind it." "Well, don't get too comfortable," Marcus replied with a forced smile. "This was just the easy stage. Wait until we get to rapid fire and position shooting. That's where modern equipment really shows its advantages." The rapid-fire stage presented a different challenge entirely. Competitors had to engage targets at 100 yards from the prone position, firing 10 rounds in 60 seconds. The emphasis shifted from pure precision to controlled speed and consistency under time pressure. Sarah approached the rapid-fire stage with the same methodical preparation she brought to everything else. She arranged her ammunition within easy reach, checked her shooting position, and mentally rehearsed the sequence she would follow. Her grandfather had competed in rapid-fire matches during his military service, and his journals contained detailed notes about rhythm, breathing, and maintaining sight alignment under time pressure. The key, according to his notes, was to find a sustainable rhythm rather than rushing. "Smooth is fast," he had written. "Jerky, hurried movements lead to missed shots and wasted time. Find your rhythm and trust it." When the rapid-fire stage began, Sarah fell into the groove immediately. Her bolt manipulation was fluid and efficient, decades of practice evident in every movement. Load, aim, fire, cycle the bolt, acquire the target, fire again. The old Springfield's action worked like clockwork, the rifle settling back in a battery after each shot with satisfying precision. Marcus, meanwhile, was struggling slightly with his modern rifle. While the equipment was technically superior, he had trained primarily for precision shooting rather than rapid fire. His expensive rifle featured a sophisticated adjustable trigger that was perfect for bench shooting, but less forgiving under time pressure. He found himself rushing his shots, trying to make up time, and his group began to spread as his technique deteriorated. Sarah completed her string with 5 seconds to spare, confident that she had maintained good shot placement throughout. When the targets were scored, she had managed a 95 out of 100, an excellent score that demonstrated consistent accuracy under time pressure. Marcus had scored an 88, with several shots straying outside the scoring rings due to his rush technique. The position shooting stage proved to be Sarah's strongest performance yet. Competitors had to engage targets from 3 different positions: standing, kneeling, and prone, with specific time limits for each position. This stage tested not only marksmanship skills, but also the ability to quickly establish stable shooting positions and adapt to different challenges. Sarah's engineering background served her well in understanding the biomechanics of shooting positions. She had studied her grandfather's notes extensively, learning how he had adapted military shooting positions for competition use. The standing position, most challenging of the 3, required a natural point of aim that aligned the body's bone structure for maximum stability. As she moved through the position sequence, Sarah felt the confidence that came from extensive practice. Her grandfather had insisted that she practice these positions until they became second nature, until her body automatically fell into the correct alignment without conscious thought. Muscle memory, he had called it. When your conscious mind is busy managing time pressure and reading wind, your body needs to know what to do automatically. The standing position shots were Sarah's best yet, a tight group centered in the 10 ring. The kneeling position allowed her to demonstrate the rock-solid stability she had developed through hours of practice. The prone position, her strongest, produced another near-perfect group. Marcus was having a more difficult time with the position stages. His expensive rifle had been optimized for prone shooting, with an adjustable stock and specialized accessories that worked beautifully from a bench rest but were less practical for rapid position changes. He found himself fumbling with adjustments that would have been automatic with a simpler, more traditional rifle. By midday, the leaderboard told a story that few had expected when the morning began. Sarah Martinez held a commanding lead, having shot consistently in the high 90s across all stages. Her old Springfield had proven remarkably versatile, performing well in precision, rapid fire, and position shooting. Marcus Thompson, despite his expensive equipment and reputation, found himself in 4th place, struggling to adapt his bench rest shooting style to the demands of practical marksmanship. During the lunch break, Sarah overheard conversations among other competitors and spectators. The shooting community was small and tight-knit, and word of her performance was spreading quickly. "Did you see that group she shot standing?" one veteran competitor was saying. "I haven't seen shooting like that since the old days when everyone used military rifles." Her grandfather was Charlie Martinez, another voice added. "Won the state championship 3 years running back in the 80s. That rifle has good genes." The attention made Sarah slightly uncomfortable, but she tried to focus on her preparation for the afternoon stages. The long-range precision shooting would be the ultimate test, 600 yards in variable wind conditions, with only the finest margins separating winners from also-rans. She found a quiet spot behind the equipment area and carefully cleaned her rifle's barrel, removing any copper fouling that might affect accuracy at extended range. The ritual gave her time to process the morning's success and prepare mentally for the challenges ahead. Her grandfather's presence felt particularly strong as she worked through the cleaning routine he had taught her. Every movement was deliberate and practiced, the proper way to guide a cleaning rod, how to recognize when the barrel was truly clean, the importance of protecting the rifle's crown from damage. Marcus approached during her cleaning session, his earlier dismissive attitude replaced by genuine curiosity. "I have to ask," he said, "how did you learn to shoot like that? I mean, no offense, but you've only been competing for what, 2 years?" Sarah looked up from her work. "My grandfather left me detailed shooting journals covering 40 years of competition. I've been studying them like textbooks, practicing everything he wrote about." Still, Marcus persisted, shooting is about more than just book learning. There's an intuitive element that takes years to develop. Sarah smiled. "You're right about the intuitive part, but I think I inherited more than just his rifle. My grandmother used to say I had his eye for detail and his stubborn streak. Maybe those traits translate to shooting." "What kind of work do you do when you're not shooting?" Marcus asked, genuinely interested now. "I'm a precision engineer at an aerospace company. We manufacture components for satellites and aircraft. I guess I'm used to working with tight tolerances and understanding how small variations can affect performance." Marcus nodded, beginning to understand how Sarah's professional background complemented her shooting skills. "That explains your methodical approach. You treat shooting like an engineering problem. In a way, Yes, Sarah agreed. Ballistics is applied physics. Wind deflection, bullet drop, atmospheric effects. They all follow predictable patterns if you understand the variables involved. As the afternoon session prepared to begin, Sarah gathered her equipment for the long-range stage. This would be the ultimate test of both shooter and equipment, 600 yards in desert conditions, with wind that had been building throughout the day. The targets would appear impossibly small through the scope, with the 10-ring measuring only 6 inches across. She opened her data book and reviewed her grandfather's notes for shooting at extended range. His handwriting filled page after page with observations about reading mirage, estimating wind speed at different ranges, and compensating for the effects of altitude and temperature on bullet performance. One passage particularly caught her attention. Long-range shooting is about patience and observation more than technical shooting skills. Spend time reading the conditions before you fire your first shot. The rifle and ammunition will do their job if you do yours. Read the wind correctly and make the right hold. The long-range firing line was set up differently than the shorter distances, with competitors spaced further apart and additional spotting scopes available for reading wind conditions. Sarah set up her equipment methodically, checking her scope settings and confirming her data for 600-yard shots. Through her scope, the target seemed tiny and impossibly distant. Heat waves danced between her position and the target, making observation challenging. The wind flags along the range showed a steady breeze from the left, but Sarah could see variations in intensity and direction at different distances. Marcus was setting up nearby, his expensive spotting scope and ballistic computer already calculating precise firing solutions. His equipment could provide detailed atmospheric readings and precise trajectory calculations, advantages that Sarah's traditional approach couldn't match. Winds running about 12 miles per hour from 9 o'clock, Marcus announced to no one in particular. Temperatures up to 95 degrees, pressure steady. This is where having accurate environmental data really pays off. Sarah nodded politely, but relied on her grandfather's methods for reading conditions. She watched the mirage through her scope, noting how the heat waves bent and shifted. She observed the grass and vegetation around the targets, seeing how the wind affected different areas of the range. Her grandfather had taught her to read these natural indicators, to become part of the environment rather than relying solely on mechanical instruments. The first shots of the long-range stage rang out across the desert, and Sarah watched the bullet impacts through her spotting scope. The conditions were challenging but manageable for a skilled shooter who understood how to read them properly. When her turn came to fire, Sarah settled into position with the confidence that came from extensive preparation. She had spent hours studying trajectory tables for her specific ammunition, learning how her bullets would perform at different ranges and conditions. More importantly, she had developed an intuitive understanding of how her grandfather's rifle behaved in various situations. Her first shot felt perfect. The trigger brake was clean, the recoil impulse straight back, the follow-through smooth and natural. Through her spotting scope, she watched the bullet impact in the 9-ring, just slightly left of center. The wind had been stronger than she estimated, but not by much. She made a mental adjustment for her second shot, holding slightly more into the wind. This bullet struck closer to the center, a solid 10. As she continued through her string, Sarah found her rhythm, reading the constantly changing wind conditions and making the precise adjustments needed for consistent accuracy at 600 yards. By the time she fired her 10th and final shot, Sarah knew she had shot well. The group was tight and well-centered, with 8 of 10 shots in the 10-ring. It was the kind of performance that her grandfather would have been proud of, precision shooting at its finest, accomplished with basic equipment and fundamental skills rather than technological advantages. The long-range scores confirmed what Sarah had felt during the shooting. She had managed a 94 out of 100, an exceptional score under the challenging conditions. Combined with her earlier performances, it gave her an overall score that would be difficult to beat. Marcus had struggled with the long-range stage, shooting an 86 that dropped him further down the leaderboard. Despite his sophisticated equipment and precise calculations, he had trouble adapting to the constantly changing wind conditions. His technological approach worked well in controlled conditions, but was less effective when dealing with the unpredictable variables of outdoor shooting. As the final scores were tabulated, Sarah cleaned her rifle and packed her equipment with the same careful attention to detail she brought to every aspect of shooting. She had learned from her grandfather that taking care of equipment was as important as knowing how to use it properly. The evening sun was beginning to set over the desert range when the final results were announced. Sarah Martinez had won her first major championship, shooting with a 70-year-old rifle against competitors using the most advanced equipment available. Her victory was more than just a personal triumph. It was a testament to the timeless principles of marksmanship that her grandfather had lived by. The announcement of Sarah Martinez as the overall champion sent ripples of amazement through the crowd at Riverside County Shooting Range. Spectators and competitors alike gathered around the scoreboard, double-checking the results that seemed almost impossible to believe. A woman shooting a 70-year-old military rifle had defeated an entire field of modern precision equipment and experienced shooters. Marcus Thompson stood in stunned silence, staring at his fourth-place finish. His expensive custom rifle, which had cost more than Sarah's annual car payments, had been thoroughly outclassed by a weapon that was already battle-tested when his father was born. The reality of defeat was difficult to process, especially given his confident predictions about the superiority of modern equipment. Sarah accepted congratulations with gracious humility, but inside she felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just occurred. This victory represented more than just a shooting competition. It was validation of her grandfather's teachings, proof that fundamental skills and dedication could triumph over technological advantages. "Incredible shooting today, Frank," the elderly rangemaster said as he approached Sarah with her trophy. "Your grandfather Charlie would have been bursting with pride. I remember when he won this same championship back in 1987 with that exact rifle." The weight of the trophy in her hands brought back memories of her grandfather's own competitive successes. His shooting room had been filled with similar awards, though he had never boasted about them. To him, competition was about personal improvement and honoring the shooting sports traditions that had shaped his generation. As the crowd began to disperse and competitors packed their equipment, Marcus finally approached Sarah. His earlier dismissive attitude had been completely replaced by genuine respect and curiosity. "I owe you an apology," he said sincerely. "My comments this morning were out of line. I made assumptions based on equipment rather than evaluating the shooter behind it." Sarah nodded graciously. "No apology necessary. I understand the skepticism. Most people see an old military rifle and assume it's obsolete. But how did you develop that level of skill so quickly?" Marcus asked. "I've been shooting competitively for over 15 years, and you outshot me convincingly today." Sarah considered the question carefully. "I think it comes down to foundation. My grandfather believed that modern shooters often rely too heavily on equipment to compensate for fundamental weaknesses. He taught me to master the basics first: perfect trigger control, natural point of aim, reading wind conditions without instruments. Plus," she continued, "I had 40 years of his experience distilled into those shooting journals. Every technique I use today was tested and refined through thousands of rounds of practice and competition." I was standing on the shoulders of a giant. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I've been so focused on upgrading equipment that I may have neglected some of those fundamentals. Modern rifles are so forgiving that you can get away with mediocre technique and still shoot decent scores. Would you be interested in some friendly practice sessions?" Sarah offered. "I could share some of my grandfather's techniques, and maybe you could teach me about some of the modern advancements that actually improve performance rather than just looking impressive." The offer surprised Marcus, given his earlier behavior, but he accepted eagerly. The shooting community was built on shared knowledge and mutual improvement, values that transcended equipment preferences or competitive rivalries. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself at the center of attention in ways she had never experienced. News of her championship victory with the vintage rifle spread through shooting sports publications and online forums. Photographers wanted pictures of her with the Springfield, writers requested interviews about her training methods, and equipment manufacturers began reaching out with sponsorship offers. The most interesting contact came from Dr. James Morrison, a sports psychologist who specialized in working with precision athletes. He had read about Sarah's victory and was intrigued by the mental aspects of her performance. "What you accomplished goes beyond just shooting skills," Dr. Morrison explained during their first meeting at his office near the university. You demonstrated exceptional mental management under pressure, especially for someone with limited competitive experience. Sarah found the conversation fascinating as Dr. Morrison analyzed the psychological aspects of her performance. Competition shooting is as much mental as physical, he continued. The ability to maintain focus and execute learned skills under pressure is what separates good shooters from champions. My grandfather wrote extensively about the mental game, Sarah replied. He called it the conversation between the shooter and the target. Everything else, equipment, conditions, even the competition itself, was just background noise. Dr. Morrison was particularly interested in how Sarah had developed such strong competitive mental skills in such a short time. Most athletes require years of competition experience to develop that level of mental control. You seem to possess it almost naturally. Maybe it's my engineering background, Sarah suggested. I'm used to working with complex systems where small errors can have major consequences. In my job, precision and attention to detail aren't just preferences, they're requirements for safety and success. The conversation with Dr. Morrison helped Sarah understand that her victory represented more than just good shooting. She had demonstrated principles that applied to many high-performance activities, the importance of fundamental skills, mental preparation, and respect for proven methods rather than chasing after the latest technological innovations. Meanwhile, her relationship with Marcus Thompson had evolved into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared learning. They began meeting regularly for practice sessions, where Sarah shared her grandfather's traditional techniques, while Marcus introduced her to beneficial modern innovations. The key, Marcus observed during one of their sessions, is knowing which modern advances actually improve performance versus which ones just look impressive. Your grandfather's approach filtered out the nonsense and focused on what really matters. Their practice sessions became informal teaching opportunities for other shooters who were curious about Sarah's methods. She found herself explaining concepts that her grandfather had taught her: how to read wind conditions using natural indicators, why consistent shooting position was more important than adjustable equipment, and how to develop the mental discipline needed for precision shooting. Traditional marksmanship isn't about being stuck in the past, Sarah would explain to interested shooters. It's about understanding the fundamental principles that don't change, regardless of what equipment you're using. These teaching sessions led to invitations to speak at shooting clubs and training seminars throughout the region. Sarah discovered that she enjoyed sharing knowledge and helping other shooters improve their skills. Her grandfather's journals contained decades of accumulated wisdom that could benefit shooters regardless of their equipment choices or competitive goals. One particularly memorable seminar took place at a youth shooting program, where Sarah worked with teenagers who were just beginning their shooting sports journey. She was struck by their enthusiasm and willingness to learn, qualities that reminded her of her own early experiences with her grandfather. The most important thing to remember, she told the young shooters, is that equipment doesn't make you a good shooter. Practice, patience, and persistence do. Start with solid fundamentals and build from there. One of the young shooters, a girl named Emily who was about the same age Sarah had been when she first learned to shoot, raised her hand. My dad says we need to buy expensive equipment to be competitive. Is that true? Sarah smiled, remembering similar concerns from her own early days. Some of the best shooters in history achieved amazing results with very basic equipment. What matters most is understanding your equipment completely and practicing consistently. You can always upgrade later, but fundamental skills are what will make you a true marksman. The seminar was a reminder of why her grandfather had been so passionate about shooting sports. It wasn't just about competition or equipment. It was about discipline, precision, and the satisfaction of mastering a challenging skill through dedicated practice. As word of Sarah's teaching abilities spread, she received an unexpected invitation to speak at the National Precision Shooting Conference, one of the most prestigious gatherings in the shooting sports community. The opportunity to share her grandfather's wisdom with a national audience was both exciting and intimidating. Preparing for the conference presentation forced Sarah to organize and articulate the principles that had guided her rapid improvement in competitive shooting. She spent weeks reviewing her grandfather's journals, identifying the key concepts that had made the biggest difference in her development. The presentation focused on three main themes that had emerged from her grandfather's decades of experience. The importance of fundamental skills that remained constant regardless of equipment advances, the mental aspects of precision shooting that often determined competitive success, and the value of systematic practice and record-keeping for continuous improvement. Modern technology can enhance performance, Sarah explained to the conference audience, but it cannot replace fundamental skills. A shooter with perfect trigger control and natural point of aim will outperform someone relying on expensive equipment to compensate for basic deficiencies. The response to her presentation exceeded all expectations. Experienced shooters approached her afterward with questions about specific techniques. Equipment manufacturers wanted to discuss her views on product development, and several shooting publications requested follow-up articles. More importantly to Sarah, many shooters expressed renewed interest in exploring traditional marksmanship methods. Her success had demonstrated that time-tested approaches still had value in an era of constant technological advancement. One conversation particularly stood out. An elderly gentleman approached her after the presentation, introducing himself as Robert Chun, a former Olympic shooting coach. Your grandfather and I competed against each other back in the 1960s and 70s, he said with a warm smile. Charlie was one of the finest natural shooters I ever knew. He had an instinctive understanding of what made rifles accurate and what made shooters consistent. He would have been thrilled to know his techniques are being shared with a new generation, Coach Chin continued. The principles he developed through decades of experience are just as valid today as they were 50 years ago. The encounter with Coach Chin reinforced Sarah's growing sense of responsibility to preserve and share her grandfather's shooting knowledge. She began considering ways to make his techniques available to a broader audience, perhaps through a book or instructional video series. The success of the conference presentation also led to unexpected opportunities. Several shooting equipment companies approached Sarah about consulting on product development, recognizing that her perspective could help them create gear that truly enhanced performance rather than just looking impressive. We've been so focused on adding features that we may have lost sight of what actually helps shooters improve, explained one product manager. Your approach reminds us that the best equipment supports fundamental skills rather than trying to replace them. These consulting opportunities gave Sarah insights into the equipment development process and reinforced her belief that the most effective tools were often the simplest ones. Her grandfather's rifle had been so successful precisely because it didn't try to do everything. It was designed to be accurate, reliable, and predictable, allowing the shooter to focus on technique rather than managing complex equipment. As summer approached, Sarah began preparing for the regional championship series, where she would face even stronger competition than her hometown range could provide. The victory at Riverside had established her reputation, but now she would compete against shooters who had been following her progress and developing strategies specifically to challenge her traditional approach. The pressure of increased expectations was something new for Sarah to manage. Her grandfather's journals contained advice about handling competitive pressure, but she was discovering that being the hunted rather than the hunter created different psychological challenges. Success brings its own problems, Dr. Morrison observed during one of their regular sessions. Expectations can be just as disruptive to performance as self-doubt. The key is maintaining the same mental approach that brought success in the first place. Sarah found herself returning repeatedly to her grandfather's fundamental philosophy about competition shooting. The conversation is still between you, your rifle, and the target, she reminded herself. Everything else is just noise. The months following her championship victory had transformed Sarah from an unknown competitor using unusual equipment into a recognized advocate for traditional marksmanship principles. But the real test would come when she faced top-level competition with everyone's attention focused on her performance. As she prepared for the challenges ahead, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility that came with representing her grandfather's legacy and the timeless principles he had spent a lifetime perfecting. The old Springfield rifle that had started as a sentimental connection to family history had become a symbol of the enduring value of fundamental skills and dedicated practice. The morning of the National Long Range Championship dawned clear and cold at the prestigious Thunder Valley Range in Nevada, where Sarah Martinez found herself facing the ultimate test of her grandfather's teachings and her own skill. 300 of the nation's finest precision shooters had gathered for this three-day competition, including multiple Olympic team members, military precision shooters, and champions from every major shooting discipline. Sarah felt the weight of expectations as she unpacked her grandfather's Springfield from its worn leather case. Over the past year, since her victory at Riverside County, she had become something of a celebrity in shooting sports circles. Magazine articles had featured her story, equipment manufacturers sought her endorsements, and young shooters across the country had begun experimenting with traditional marksmanship techniques. But here at Thunder Valley, facing the most demanding competition of her career, all the attention and accolades meant nothing. Success would depend entirely on her ability to execute under pressure, to prove that fundamental skills and time-tested principles could compete at the highest levels of the sport. The competition format was brutal in its simplicity. Precision shooting at 1,000 yards over 3 days, with varying weather conditions, and time pressures designed to separate true masters from merely competent shooters. Each competitor would fire a total of 60 shots for record, with no practice rounds allowed, and no opportunity for equipment adjustments between stages. Marcus Thompson had qualified for the championship based on his improved performance following their practice sessions together. He approached Sarah's setup area the evening before competition began, carrying his own rifle case with obvious nervousness. "I have to admit, I'm more anxious about this competition than any I've ever attended," Marcus confessed. "The field is incredible. Half these shooters have won national championships, and several are current or former world record holders." Sarah nodded, understanding his concern. "My grandfather wrote about competing at this level. He said the difference between champions and everyone else isn't equipment or even basic skill. It's the ability to execute perfectly when execution matters most." "How are you handling the pressure?" Marcus asked. "Everyone's watching to see if your traditional approach can succeed against the absolute best shooters in the country." "I keep reminding myself that the fundamentals don't change," Sarah replied. "Whether I'm shooting at my local range or here at nationals, the conversation is still between me, my rifle, and the target. Everything else is just noise." As they spoke, a small crowd had gathered around Sarah's equipment area. Her setup looked almost primitive compared to the high-tech gear surrounding it. No ballistic computers, no electronic wind meters, no adjustable chassis systems with dozens of adjustment points. Just the old Springfield, a simple bipod, and basic spotting equipment that could have been used decades earlier. Among the observers was Amanda Torres, the current women's national champion and holder of multiple world records. Amanda's rifle represented the pinnacle of modern technology, with every component optimized for maximum accuracy and adjustability. She had been following Sarah's rise in the sport with professional interest. "Mind if I take a look at your setup?" Amanda asked politely. "I'm curious about your approach to equipment selection." Sarah welcomed the opportunity to explain her grandfather's philosophy. He believed that simpler equipment forced you to develop better fundamental skills. When you can't adjust your way out of a problem, you have to solve it through better technique. Amanda examined the Springfield with obvious respect. "There's something appealing about that approach. Sometimes I wonder if all my adjustments and gadgets are helping or just giving me more ways to second-guess myself." "The key," Sarah explained, "is understanding your equipment completely. I know exactly how this rifle behaves in different conditions because I've studied it intensively. My grandfather's journals contain detailed notes about temperature effects, ammunition performance, and even how the rifle's point of impact changes as the barrel heats up." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel James Mitchell, former commander of the Army Marksmanship Unit, and one of the most respected figures in competitive shooting. He had heard about Sarah's unconventional approach and wanted to see the famous Springfield for himself. "This is a fine example of the M1903A4, Colonel Mitchell observed, examining the rifle with obvious expertise. "These rifles were incredibly accurate when properly maintained. Your grandfather knew what he was doing when he selected this one for competition." "Did you know my grandfather?" Sarah asked with surprise. Colonel Mitchell smiled. Charlie Martinez was well known in military shooting circles. He served as an instructor at the Army Marksmanship Unit for several years in the 1970s. Many current coaches learned fundamental techniques from him. The revelation added another layer of significance to Sarah's journey. Her grandfather's influence on American marksmanship had been broader than she had ever realized, extending far beyond his personal competition record. As the first day of competition began, Sarah found herself assigned to Relay 3, giving her the opportunity to observe earlier shooters and assess the challenging conditions. The wind at Thunder Valley was notorious for its complexity, with shifting patterns caused by the surrounding mountain terrain. Through her spotting scope, Sarah watched the first relay of shooters engage targets at 1,000 yards. The conditions were demanding, with a gusty crosswind that varied in intensity and direction. Several highly ranked competitors struggled with the changing conditions, their sophisticated wind-reading equipment unable to keep pace with the rapidly shifting patterns. Marcus was shooting in Relay 2, and Sarah watched his performance with interest. His equipment functioned flawlessly, but she could see him struggling with the mental aspects of the competition. The pressure of competing at the national level was affecting his normally smooth shooting rhythm. When Relay 3 was called to the line, Sarah gathered her equipment and moved to firing point 17. The walk to the line gave her time to center herself mentally, using breathing techniques her grandfather had learned during his military service. The range officer conducted the mandatory equipment inspection, paying particular attention to Sarah's vintage rifle. Springfield M1903A4, manufactured in 1943, he noted for the record. Scope is period correct on Nerdle target scope. Everything looks good for vintage military division. Sarah settled into her shooting position with the deliberate care that had become her trademark. Every movement was purposeful and practiced based on thousands of repetitions during practice sessions. She arranged her equipment precisely, checked her data book one final time, and began the mental process of reading the complex wind conditions. The first target appeared impossibly small at 1,000 yards, even through her scope. The wind flags along the range showed the challenging conditions she had observed earlier: gusty, variable winds that would test every shooter's ability to read and compensate for environmental factors. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory as she prepared for her first shot. At long range, patience is your greatest asset. Take time to understand what the wind is doing. The rifle will put the bullet where you aim it, but you have to aim at the right place. Sarah spent several minutes simply observing before loading her first cartridge. She watched the mirage, noted how the wind affected vegetation at different distances, and began to build a mental picture of the complex air currents between her position and the target. Her first shot felt perfect: smooth trigger control, natural follow-through, and complete confidence in her wind call. Through her spotting scope, she watched the bullet impact just left of center in the 9-ring. The wind had been slightly stronger than she estimated, but her adjustment was small and precise. The second shot moved closer to center, confirming her wind reading and building confidence for the remaining shots in the string. As Sarah continued firing, she fell into the focused state that competitive shooters called the zone, where external distractions faded away and only the essential elements of marksmanship remained. By the time she fired her 10th and final shot of the first string, Sarah knew she had shot well. The group was tight and well-centered, representing exactly the kind of performance she had been working toward for the past year. When targets were retrieved and scored, Sarah's performance exceeded even her own expectations. She had shot a 97 out of 100, placing her third overall after the first day. More importantly, she had demonstrated that traditional techniques could compete effectively even under the most demanding conditions. Amanda Torres approached Sarah during the break between relays, genuine admiration evident in her expression. "That was exceptional shooting," Amanda said. "I've been watching through my spotting scope, and your wind reading was absolutely perfect. How do you do it without electronic instruments?" Sarah smiled, remembering her grandfather's teachings. "He taught me to become part of the environment rather than trying to measure it mechanically. You learn to feel the wind, to see how it affects everything between you and the target." "Would you be willing to share some of those techniques?" Amanda asked. "I'm always looking for ways to improve, regardless of where the knowledge comes from." The conversation with Amanda reflected a broader change Sarah had noticed in the shooting community. Initially, many competitors had been skeptical of her traditional approach, viewing it as nostalgic but impractical. But her consistent success had forced even the most technology-oriented shooters to reconsider the value of fundamental skills. The second day of competition brought even more challenging conditions, with a desert windstorm creating difficult shooting conditions that tested every competitor's ability to adapt. Sarah's preparation with her grandfather's journals proved invaluable, as he had documented techniques for shooting in exactly these conditions during his military service in similar terrain. While many competitors struggled with the harsh conditions, Sarah found herself drawing on lessons learned from her grandfather's experiences in combat and competition. The principles remained the same regardless of the specific challenges. Read the conditions carefully, trust your preparation, and execute with confidence. Her second-day performance of 95 points moved her into second place overall, behind only Amanda Torres. The consistency of her shooting, combined with her ability to adapt to changing conditions, had impressed even the most experienced competitors and coaches. Colonel Mitchell approached Sarah after the second day's shooting, his respect evident in his demeanor. "Your grandfather would be incredibly proud," he said simply. "You're demonstrating principles he helped develop and teach to generations of military and civilian shooters." The final day of competition dawned with perfect conditions, clear skies, light winds, and excellent visibility. These were the conditions that would allow the finest shooters to demonstrate their maximum potential, where small differences in skill and preparation would determine the ultimate champion. Sarah prepared for the final day with the same methodical attention to detail that had brought her success throughout the competition. She cleaned her rifle carefully, organized her ammunition, and reviewed her data book one final time. Every shot of the past 2 days had been recorded and analyzed, building a comprehensive picture of how her rifle performed under various conditions. As she moved to the firing line for the final relay, Sarah felt a sense of calm confidence that came from thorough preparation and trust in proven methods. The conversation between herself, her rifle, and the target would determine the outcome. Everything else was simply background noise. Her final day performance was the best yet, a 98 that demonstrated complete mastery of the challenges that had defeated many other competitors. When combined with her previous scores, it gave her a total that placed her atop the leaderboard as the new national long-range champion. The victory represented more than just personal achievement. Sarah had proven that traditional marksmanship principles, properly understood and applied, could compete successfully at the highest levels of modern competition. Her grandfather's legacy had been validated in the most public and demanding way possible. During the awards ceremony, Sarah accepted her championship trophy while holding her grandfather's Springfield, a symbolic passing of knowledge from one generation to the next. The applause from competitors and spectators reflected recognition not just of her shooting skills, but of her role in preserving and promoting fundamental marksmanship principles. "This victory belongs to my grandfather," Sarah said during her brief acceptance speech. "He spent 40 years learning these techniques, testing them in competition, and documenting them for future generations. I was just fortunate enough to be his student." But even as she celebrated the championship, Sarah knew her real victory was broader than any single competition. She had helped demonstrate that the fundamentals of marksmanship, accuracy, consistency, and mental discipline, remained constant regardless of technological advances or changing fashions in equipment. The old rifle that had started as a sentimental connection to her grandfather's memory had become a symbol of timeless principles that would continue to guide shooters long after the latest technological innovations had been forgotten. Sarah Martinez had proved that in a world increasingly focused on complexity and technology, sometimes the simplest approaches yielded the most profound results.